Merry meet my fellow bookish witches. Welcome to Witchy Reads. Today I want to do things a little bit different. I would like to discuss the two memoirs that I read in 2023. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeannette McCurdy and The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I'm going to preface this by saying I don't plan on going into a full deep dive into either of these books. This is more going to be a discussion, talking about key points in the books, and also my experience in reading them. I rarely pick up nonfiction works to read, but on occasion I will read memoirs if it's a famous person that I am a fan of, or if the story that they want to tell sounds interesting. For both of these books, it heavily falls into the latter category. I wouldn't say that I was huge fans of either Jeannette McCurdy or Britney Spears, but the story that both of them wanted to tell as far as their lived experiences definitely resonated with me even prior to reading their stories, and that is why I decided to pick both of these up this year and read them. I also exclusively listen to memoirs on audiobook simply because I find it a lot easier to digest. 9 times out of 10, it is the author themselves reading the story, which I find adds a emotional component. I think it's the best way to convey the emotions that the author is trying to get across. Jeannette McCurdy read her book, Britney Spears did not. And while I appreciate that Jeannette was able to give that for readers, I am not necessarily going to hold it against Britney that she chose not to, especially with the subject matter. I could definitely see it re-traumatizing her. Not to say that Jeannette McCurdy was any stronger than Britney simply because she read her story. I'm not going to judge her for reading her story, and I'm not going to judge Britney for opting to not do that. I didn't necessarily set out to read either of these books. Neither of them were really on my radar until they had been published. Once the books were released, particularly Jeannette McCurdy's book, people started talking about, oh my gosh, how could she write a story, a scathing memoir about her mother? How dare she?
I have a lot of questions. Number one, how dare you?
That is what intrigued me and what had me picking up the book to read it. Whereas with Britney Spears, I was interested in reading it simply because we had been told her story from so many different people that I wanted the chance to hear what happened from her.
Stop the violence.
Quickly became evident to me as to why I wanted to read both of these books. Both of them deal with very heavy subject matter, particularly with their family dynamics, that for me resonated personally. I could definitely see myself being in the headspace of wanting to read something in the vein of what I kind of had dealt with in my own childhood and grappling with that. That was another big draw for me. This is also why I wanted to discuss them together. I'm not going to sit here and say that Jeannette's story is at all similar to Britney's story. There are similarities, and I feel like the bare bones narrative of being a child star, growing up with narcissistic parents, and enduring abuse at the hands of those narcissistic parents are definitely similarities. As a child of a narcissist myself, these books were particularly hard to get through. It definitely impacted me emotionally, but I am very glad that I chose to read them. And I really feel like a lot more people should read them. I take a longer look at the words on her headstone: brave, kind, loyal, sweet, loving, graceful, strong, thoughtful, funny, genuine, hopeful, playful, insightful, and on and on. Was she though? Was she any of those things? The words make me angry. I can't look at them any longer. Why do we romanticize the dead? Why can't we be honest about them? The first book I read was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeannette McCurdy. This book was actually published in August of 2022. Like I said, I didn't become really aware of it until the beginning of this year when the media started buzzing about the subject matter and particularly the title. Everyone was really hyper-focused on what she titled this book. I will say right here in defense of the title, it is a perfect title. Content warnings for this book include emotional, financial, and sexual abuse, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, substance abuse, primarily alcohol, and PTSD. I could be missing a few things, but those are the heavy hitters. And when I tell you that Jeannette McCurdy does not hold back, she goes into detail. If any of those are triggers for you, while I praise this book and I think it's wonderful, please take care of yourself. I'm sure the last thing that Jeannette McCurdy would want from her book is for someone else to be re-traumatized. This book is super heavy and she does not hold back, nor should she. I was aware of Jeannette McCurdy prior to this book. I am aware of the TV show iCarly. I am also vaguely aware that she did a spinoff of that called Sam and Cat. I have watched a few episodes of iCarly. I wasn't like a super fan or anything. By the time Sam and Cat came around, I had definitely aged out of their target demographic. While I was aware of her, I wouldn't call myself an uber fan. Like many people who were aware of iCarly and had watched some of the episodes, I do think that she is the best part of that. Her character Sam was awesome, but now knowing that she really doesn't want to be associated with iCarly anymore, I'm going to respect that. I didn't know about McCurdy's book until well after it was published, and the media had picked it up, criticizing her, saying that it was rude or not a good way to represent her mother because it's simply her mother and she deserves some kind of respect by simply being a mother.
How dare you?
I will tell you that the mental level you have to get to say that you are glad that your mom died, to cut off your mother, to go low contact to no contact with your mother or any parent for that matter. It is such an emotional toll. It is not something that is an instant light switch that you flip and you decide to cut that parent out of your life. No, it is arguably years of debating with yourself and ultimately deciding that this is the best course of action for your mental health. There's clearly a reason why she titled the book the way she did. How the logic of people demanding that Jeannette apologize for that was confounding to me. They put parents on a pedestal that a lot of parents do not deserve. And I am telling you this from someone who was also raised by a narcissist. Not all parents are good. And if you are not a good person and you happen to have a child, the chances of you becoming a shitty parent are way higher than you simply deciding, oh, I'm going to change and be a good person for this little human that I now have to take care of. I think it's far more likely that if you are a bad person and you add a child into that mix, that person isn't necessarily going to be better and in fact could get worse. So I'm just going to say, for the people that came after Jeannette for the title of her book, y'all can take several seats. I really hope after so much time that you have read Jeannette's book and realized that her title fits and is exactly what her mother deserves. I think one of the big takeaways with reading Jeannette's book is that it teaches people mothers are not infallible. They are human and they can make mistakes. The problem is that when mothers make mistakes, it is not just the mother that suffers, it is the child that suffers too. Jeannette does an incredible job of covering each instance of abuse at the hands of her mother in excruciating detail. It is so hard to read this book if you have gone through similar experience that Jeannette has. It is rough to get through. I had a feeling it was probably going to be one of the more relatable reads I had ever read, and I was right. I added this book to my Audible account and finished it in 2 days. It's interesting and heartbreaking to know that children of narcissistic parents can pinpoint similarities in their upbringing, and that is essentially what I could do in reading Jeannette's book. There are different degrees, of course, and I'm not going to sit here and try and compare my upbringing to Jeannette's. I am not a child actor. I definitely did not experience the level of abuse that Jeannette did. There were certain things that when Jeannette spoke of them, sent me into this dark flashback of my childhood. I realized there were certain things that I didn't necessarily pick up on when I was a child, particularly with being aware of cues from that parent. If they are angry, if you feel like what you're about to do is going to upset them, you kind of almost gain a sixth sense so that you avoid that at all costs. And Jeannette talks about how she was essentially walking on eggshells around her mother. That is definitely something that I remember having to do as a child. And even now as an adult, I find myself doing around certain people. Now that I am more aware of it, I try to avoid doing that because I should not apologize for taking up space and believing the things that I believe. I realized that was definitely something that I did do to kind of get through the day and avoid any arguments or anger in my household. This kind of trauma can spread into adulthood, and if not handled properly with therapy, can fester and linger, and that's just not good. To say this book was an emotional read for me is an understatement. In some strange way, gave me hope that also generational trauma can come to an end. Thing is about Jeannette's story is that it didn't end until her mother died. It should not have needed to come to that. It should have stopped well before her mother passed away. And unfortunately for Jeannette, it almost feels like if her mother hadn't passed away, she would still be stuck in that narcissistic, abusive cycle. It was on her mother to fix. My belief that Jeannette would still be stuck had she not passed away is demonstrated perfectly by Jeannette going to therapy after her mother had passed away, and the therapist digging deep into the psychosis and the relationship that she had with her mother until the therapist finally has to tell Jeannette, your mother abused you. And instead of taking that in and maybe working through that, lashes out at that therapist saying, why are you being mean to my mother? My mother didn't abuse me. At that point, she still hadn't come to terms with what her upbringing was and what her mother had done to her. It is clear that her mother dying is what essentially started her process of healing and accepting the fact that her mother abused her. The hold that a narcissistic parent has on their child is really strong, and it gets stronger the longer you've been in that situation. Jeannette was in that situation for a very long time. So it's not surprising that she lashed out at that therapist in that way. I know that I used to do the same. I used to defend my narcissistic parent all the time. Now, as an adult, I've been able to recognize that behavior in that parent, so I am better equipped at dealing with that. Jeannette ultimately does manage to come to terms with that, but it doesn't happen right away. Healing takes time. It never is a quick fix. It's important to know that if you're in a situation that's similar and you're not getting better right away, do not be hard on yourself. Do not stop seeking therapy and help. It takes time, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm glad that Jeannette managed to break that cycle, but it should not have come at such a high cost. The previous quote I read is interesting because there seems to be a lot of demanding respect for the dead, whether or not the person was good or bad in life. And I feel like that needs to stop. That's not how this should work. The hard truth is there are people in this world, and when those people decide to have children, they become parents. Just because you are a parent doesn't give you a free pass to do or to treat your child however you want. They are their own separate human person and deserve to be treated as such. Jeannette's mother did not view her children as independent people, particularly Jeannette. We see this in how her mother wanted to live vicariously through her by giving her all the things she felt she deserved in her own upbringing and forcing that onto Jeannette. This means dragging Jeannette all over Southern California to all these different auditions and hoping that she lands this big break. Doesn't matter that she's spending money that the family doesn't have, causing the entire family to suffer to fulfill this dream of hers. It's not even Jeanette's dream. Jeanette wants nothing to do with this, but she is doing it because she knows it will make her mother happy. And that is another symptom of having a narcissistic parent. The child tends to lose themselves or only focuses on the things they know that will make the parent happy. That is what becomes their entire personality, which is really sad. And I know a lot of people will say like, oh my gosh, there are so many people that would love to have a mother to spend all this money and take all this time to try and get her into Hollywood. Fine. But that's not what Jeanette wanted. That was never Jeanette's dream. Jeanette does recount the one time that she expressed something outside of acting that she was passionate about, which was writing. Her mother had a full-on meltdown talking about how Jeanette didn't appreciate everything that she'd done for her. And no, writing isn't what she really wanted. What she really wanted was to do acting, and she doesn't know what she's talking about. Because Jeanette was desperate to make her mother happy, she just went along with it and agreed. Jeanette is a phenomenal writer. The way this book is written is amazing. And it is really sad to know that writing was always her passion. Her mother couldn't give an inch of support for something that not only was her daughter passionate about, but was genuinely talented at. Of course, things take an even darker turn once Jeanette lands the role of Sam in iCarly, because now not only do we have her mother wanting to live vicariously through her as this actress, Jeanette quickly becomes the golden goose supporting her entire family. That level of responsibility should never be on the shoulders of a child. It is sickening that there was no protection for her. This wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things, and I could have sworn there were laws protecting against childhood actors. I could be wrong. Maybe it's more of a recent thing. The fact that we are in 2023 and it feels like this same situation could be happening to another child and no one is there to stop it is crazy to me. This is not okay. Jeanette really doesn't like to be recognized only for her role as Sam in iCarly. And I get it. There is a lot of trauma for her associated with that role, not only with her mother and her family, but also with the allegations that came out about the creator of that show. She's very careful about what she says. I would say in the entirety of the book, that is probably the one area that she doesn't go into excruciating detail. I get wanting to tell the story, but also keep it vague enough where you're not going to be attacked by any other parties waiting to see what you say about them. Especially since she was offered a deal to essentially sign an NDA and refused, which is super impressive. Bravo for her. Stuff like that needs to be exposed, especially when, again, it comes to child actors. Then, of course, we come to the story of when Jeanette was 11 years old. Her mother began criticizing the way she looked. Her weight caused her to develop an eating disorder, which is absolutely disgusting as a mother. You should not be doing that. Jeanette's mother would monitor her food intake to the point where Jeanette couldn't even go to a birthday party without worrying about the amount of food or what kind of food she was taking in. Her mother also burdened her with her possessive nature. She would not allow Jeanette to go to the bathroom or to shower alone until well into her teenage years. This is where a lot of the description comes in that deals with the sexual abuse. I won't detail it here. Jeanette does that for you. As a mother, it was bad enough reading it the first time, and I don't think I could muster the strength to read that again. A lot of people may balk at that passage and claim that that's not real sexual abuse. Let me stop you right there. Yes, absolutely, that's what it was. In order to cope with all of this, Jeanette unfortunately turns to alcohol. I'm not one to judge anyone on their vices, but I think we can all agree if you are using something as a crutch to get through the day, That's not a healthy habit you want to develop. Can ultimately lead to a lifelong struggle of dependence. Sadly, this is what happens to Jeannette. As Jeannette gets older, we also see her struggling to develop healthy adult relationships. This is another common experience of children of narcissistic parents once they are older. They have a hard time getting into other healthy relationships because all they've known is the unhealthy relationship that tends to be what they fall into as adults. That happened with me in the past and is something that I am still working through in my own life. While there are many things that happened during Jeannette's childhood that I can relate to, it's more so the aftermath, developing a PTSD from growing up with a narcissistic parent that hit the hardest for me. I know I have dealt with my fair share of toxic adult relationships. I get anxious worrying if people dislike me. Part of this is trying to read people and always expecting the worst outcome. But more than anything, I have always allowed those unhealthy, toxic relationships to last way longer than they should have. While a part of me is glad that I could relate to Jeannette's struggles and marvel at her writing, there was also a huge part of me that was stressed while reading this book. She tells her story so well and in such explicit detail that it would be almost impossible if you have dealt with a similar situation to not be deeply affected.
I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
The saddest part to me was that what I always wanted was a dad who would love me as I was. Somebody who would say, "I just love you. You could do anything right now. I'd still love you with unconditional love." The Woman in Me by Britney Spears is a much more recent read for me. If you had watched my Cozy Yule TBR video, you'd see that that was one of the picks that I had to read for the winter season. Well, I've read it. Content warnings for this book include physical, emotional, and financial abuse. And again, I am sure there are other triggers in this book, but those are the main heavy hitters. Right off the bat, there is a huge difference in the writing for this story. Where Jeannette McCurdy wrote her memoir, Britney Spears hired a ghostwriter, journalist Sam Lansky. A lot has been said about the writing being fragmented and the voice being juvenile. I understand the criticism to an extent. If a memoir happens to be written well, I just consider that a bonus. What I am more interested in is how they make me feel and if they can convey the emotional impact of their story well. Writing level be damned. Do I agree with the sentiments that this book is written in a little bit of a juvenile tone? I'm not about to say they're false. Britney's book certainly isn't the best memoir, but I would be lying if I didn't say it is one of my favorites. This is primarily due to the emotions that it stirred in me, much like Jeannette's book. Where Jeannette's book hit a nerve in terms of my childhood and upbringing, Britney's book did the same, but for my adult years, especially now that I am a parent. If Jeannette's story shows how generational trauma can start and fester at a young age, Britney's story shows how it can manifest and spread into adult years and then affect every person around you. Britney's father was malicious, calculating, and cold. He betrayed his daughter and used her as a workhorse to live a lavish lifestyle he did not earn or deserve. He gaslit her, used her, took her money, kept her kids from her, and committed her to rehab and psych facilities multiple times. And this was all allowed under the now infamous, and I cannot believe this is legal, conservatorship. Her mother and sister were no better. Instead of stepping up and protecting their daughter/sister, they allowed the father to continue his reign of terror because they benefited from it. Her mother knew well in advance what her father was plotting and could have said something to prevent it, or at least to warn her that it was coming, because she knew. But she allowed her daughter to be trapped and then suffer for years. For over a decade, Jamie Lynn, her sister, blamed Britney for their parents' divorce because when Britney started working and bringing in that money and supporting the family, her parents then had the money to divorce and leave their toxic relationship, which they absolutely should have done. I feel like it is so obnoxiously immature of her sister to allow her older sister to continue to be abused simply because you in your warped brain think she is the reason your parents divorced. No, your parents divorced because they were in a toxic relationship. It is a vile reason to allow your sister to live in hell. I guess, Jamie Lynn, you do you. This was the big thing that I related to in Britney's book because I remember growing up with my narcissistic parent that I had other family members that saw and knew what my parent was doing to me and did absolutely nothing. Now, I'm not sure if it was a matter of they felt helpless or what. I would hope that if I was put in a similar situation with another family member that is a child, that I would say something. As a child, and even still as a vulnerable adult, it is heartbreaking to know that others, supposed loved ones, could have helped you and they actively chose not to. No one helped me. No one saved me. I was lucky that I was able to get out at 19. Unfortunately for Britney, she wasn't so lucky. Britney was very attached to her family, and so when she became famous and was bringing in money, she wanted to help them. She wanted to provide for them. This continued until her father trapped her in that conservatorship, and now she is in her 40s. That conservatorship was 13 years of her life. 13 years that she will never get back. Something like that messes with you psychologically. And while yes, technically when the conservatorship happened, she was an adult, she had already been in a perpetual state of adolescence forced upon her by the people in her life. And then you get put into this situation where you are being controlled every single moment of every single day. How are you supposed to grow as a person? You just can't. And so I direct you again to the claims that the voice of this book is very juvenile. I believe that that was intentional. I think it was an effective way to show the extent in which this can damage a person. If your parents keep you in a perpetual state of adolescence, of course you are still going to be in that same mindset when you escape. Healing takes time. It's not like she could flip a switch and all of a sudden she's going to be a normal 40-year-old. That is not going to happen. She is going to need therapy. She is going to need to work through everything that happened to her. And part of that is that she is going to be stuck in this younger mindset for a while. Now, could she have waited? Sure, but that's not our choice. If this was a cathartic thing for her to help her move past what she went through, then by all means, she had every right to write this book. Britney was treated like a show pony where her immediate family reaped all the benefits and rewards, while her father dangled carrots in front of Britney to continue to get her to cooperate. And for Britney, what were those carrots? Her kids. Her kids were used against her to keep her in line. It broke my heart to read the passage of when her children were taken away from her and every instance that she was kept from them throughout their lives. They were used as pawns to keep her in line, and it wrecked me emotionally to read that because I can't even fathom the pain it must have caused her to not be able to see her children whenever she wanted to. As a fellow mother, I wept for her. All she wanted was a happy, loving family. She wasn't even allowed to have that with the one she tried to create. Speaking of which, her ex-husband, Kevin Federline, is an asshole. He used Britney like everyone else and then abandoned her. He took her kids from her and helped her father prevent her from seeing them. The only reason that garbage man sought sole custody of those kids was so that he could get a piece of the pie. Garbage human. And while we're here, Justin Timberlake isn't any better. He had every opportunity to fix what he did to her. He dragged her reputation through the mud while profiting off of her misery. He had the audacity to label her the cheater in their relationship when he was the one off boinking anything that batted eyes at him. He is a snake, and I am ashamed that I ever was a fan. Both of these relationships that she had are clear examples of what it means to seek out relationships that ultimately turned out to be toxic. Had her parents been actual good parents, she may not have sought out men like Justin Timberlake, Kevin Federline, who treated her like garbage and were absolutely toxic. I have no judgment for the choices she ultimately made in her adult relationships. I get it. I understand it. In this, I am the most like her. I do find it slightly interesting that of all of the memoirs that I want to read that are on my TBR, it was these two recent releases that I was most drawn to read this year. Maybe it's because I would finally like to heal from my own experience of having a narcissistic parent, especially now that I have a child of my own. Whatever the reason, I was drawn to these two memoirs, and now after having read them, in a weird way, I feel more validated in my own experiences. The fact that money and fame can't protect you from that kind of experience, especially if you were a child, is eye-opening and sad. I could have sworn that there were laws to protect child actors or famous children to prevent abuse of that system. I could be wrong, or looking into it, it does seem like there are more recent laws. Probably around Britney's time, these laws didn't exist. I'm not 100% sure about Jeannette. I did a very cursory Google search as far as the laws. It does seem that there are laws that are getting picked up. Whether or not they're being enforced is another thing entirely. All I can say is I hope that Hollywood changes and that there are definitely more laws in place to protect children from their own parents. I also think there needs to be more oversight on conservatorships. And that's nothing new to say since it's come out with what Britney has dealt with. I'm sure there are a lot of people who feel the same way. And I hope that changes are made. What she went through should definitely never have happened. I know I'm not the only one who's asked this. Why was this allowed to happen and for so long? Neither of these women deserved anything that happened to them. And in the end, I'm glad that they managed to get away from their toxic situations. I know I am not the only one who has this sentiment. I am glad Jeanette's mother is dead too. I rated I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeannette McCurdy 5 out of 5 stars. From the emotional impact to the spectacular writing, it really wasn't hard to give it a perfect rating. This rating is also for the audiobook. I think Jeannette did a great job of reading her story. There were moments where you could hear the emotions coming through. I am so proud of her that she managed to find the strength to read her story. I rated The Woman in Me by Britney Spears 4 out of 5 stars. While her book also had a strong emotional impact on me, the writing just wasn't as strong. This is okay with me, but it is noticeable. I won't begrudge Britney for not wanting to read her story. The audiobook is read by actress Michelle Williams, and while I still hold the stance that an audiobook of a memoir should be read by the author, I think Michelle Williams did an excellent job conveying the right emotions in her read. It really felt like how Britney would have wanted the story to be told. The fact is, Britney managed to get her story out there, and how she went about it is her decision, and I respect that. And while Britney is not required to tell more of her story than she wants to, the book doesn't go into much more detail than what is already out there being consumed by the media. Would I have liked more detail? Sure, but again, this is her story and how she wanted to tell it. However much information she wants to share is up to her. What I liked about this book was that it was Britney's story being told by Britney. It was her own experiences versus words coming out of other people's mouths. There has been a lot of other people talking about her story, and I'm not going to harp on how she chose to tell it, what she chose to tell us, as long as she is the one doing it. I think both of these books are excellent reads, especially if you want insight into what it is actually like to be born and raised in that kind of environment. I think a lot more people need to understand the type of environment that both of these women came from. I think it will go a long way in helping the average Joe realize that simply having a kid does not make you a better person. I hope that both Jeannette and Britney can look forward to a brighter future. It does seem that both of them are working hard towards that, and I am happy for them. That's all I really have to say about both of these wonderful books. If you would like to discuss either of these books further with me, please feel free to leave a comment down below. You can also reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram. I have both. If you've been enjoying my bookish content and would like to help my channel, the best way to do that right now is to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share any videos that you particularly enjoyed. It actually is a huge help, and I really appreciate it. Until our next chapter together, merry part and blessed be.